Today, we're diving deep into one of the wildest and most persistent legends of the 20th century. We're talking about a story that has it all: top-secret science, teleportation, and a massive warship that supposedly just vanished into thin air.
And it all kicks off with these words, taken from a really bizarre letter written by the only person who claimed to have seen it happen. He paints this incredible picture of a strange, green fog and a ship just disappearing right before his very eyes. And that's the big question, right? Could something like this actually happen? This is the Philadelphia experiment, a story that perfectly mashes up the high-stakes secrecy of wartime with some seriously out-there science fiction. Okay, let's get into it. First, we gotta look at the story as it's been told for decades. It's this gripping tale of a top-secret experiment that went horribly, and I mean impossibly wrong.
So, picture this. It's October 1943. The world is at war. And at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, the U.S. Navy is supposedly running a super-secret test on one of its ships, the USS Eldridge. They were desperate for any advantage they could get, and the goal here was absolutely huge: make their warships totally invisible to the enemy.
Now, here's what makes the legend feel so plausible. It ties itself to real, high-level physics. The story goes that the Navy had secretly finished Albert Einstein's life's work, the unified field theory, and figured out how to weaponize it. The idea was to create an electromagnetic field so powerful it could literally bend light and radar around the ship, making it just disappear.
And according to the legend, the test worked way better than anyone could have imagined. Massive generators on board hum to life. This weird green fog rolls in and completely swallows the ship. But it didn't just turn invisible. Nope. It completely vanished from the shipyard in Philly, only to pop up hundreds of kilometers away in Norfolk, Virginia, before teleporting right back.
But wait, it gets even weirder. Witnesses down in Norfolk supposedly saw the Eldridge for just a few minutes, but get this, their clocks showed that it had arrived 10 minutes before it even left Philadelphia. The experiment hadn't just broken the rules of space, it had apparently punched a hole right through time itself.
And this is where the story shifts from sci-fi to just pure horror. When the ship finally reappeared for good in Philadelphia, the crew had suffered a terrible, unthinkable fate. Some men were found physically fused into the steel bulkheads of the ship. Others went completely insane. Some just vanished forever. The price for this incredible new power was a human nightmare. So you can see right here, we've got two completely different stories. On one side, you've got teleportation, time travel, and vanished crews, and on the other, you've got something called degaussing and official ship's logs. So, how in the world did a story this wild even get started? Well, that's where things get really interesting. You see, this entire sprawling myth, it didn't start in 1943 with some secret experiment. It actually started more than a decade later with a pen, some paper, and a guy who researched UFOs.
And when you look at the timeline, it's pretty revealing. For 12 years after this supposedly world-changing event, there was nothing. Total silence. The story only pops up in 1955, and from there, it just gets amplified by a strange series of events, a personal tragedy, and, of course, a big Hollywood movie.
The story we all know today came from these weird, rambling letters sent to a guy named Morris K. Jessup, an author who just published a book on UFOs. The person writing the letters, a man named Carl Allen, though he used the name Carlos Allende, claimed he was the one and only witness, watching it all happen from a nearby merchant ship. So, this brings us to the most important question. Who was Carl Allen? Well, this is where the whole incredible legend just starts to completely fall apart. Investigators found out that he was a known prankster. His own family called him a master leg puller who got his facts all twisted. And on top of that, he later admitted to at least one investigative group that he just made the whole thing up. Okay, so if the Navy wasn't building a teleportation device in the Philadelphia shipyard, what were they actually doing there in 1943? Well, the real answer is way more practical, but honestly, it's just as interesting in its own way. Turns out, the Navy was doing secret experiments there, but it had nothing to do with making ships invisible to the human eye. They were working on a process called degaussing. Basically, they'd wrap the ship's hull in giant electrical cables to cancel out its magnetic field.
This made the ship invisible to German mines and torpedoes that were triggered by magnetism. It was a very real, life-saving piece of tech.
And what about that dramatic, eerie green fog? Yeah, there's a perfectly normal explanation for that, too. It was most likely something called St. Elmo's fire. It's a weather phenomenon where all the electrical energy in the air creates this glowing plasma that clings to ships, and it often has a greenish-blue color.
But honestly, the real smoking gun, the evidence that just blows the whole story out of the water, is the ship's own official logs. I mean, these are legally binding records. On the exact day of the supposed experiment, the USS Eldridge's log puts it in New York City Harbor, not Philadelphia. And Carl Allen's ship, it wasn't anywhere near Philly either. It was already out at sea, heading for the Mediterranean. Now, a lot of conspiracy theorists will point to the tragic suicide of the author, Morris Jessup, as proof that he knew too much, and the government had him silenced. But the sad reality, which was confirmed by everyone close to him, is that Jessup was just in a very dark place. His career was failing, he was having money problems, and his wife had just left him. It was a personal tragedy, not a government cover-up.
So the evidence is pretty overwhelming, right? The Philadelphia experiment was a hoax, born from a simple misunderstanding of real science and the wild imagination of one man. So the question is, why is it still one of the most popular conspiracy theories of all time?
Well, it's because it's kind of the perfect recipe for a modern myth. It's got a dash of real science with Einstein, a big secret of government, a super dramatic story with heroes and victims, and this one mysterious storyteller. And then, once a movie like 1984's The Philadelphia Experiment hit the big screen, the legend was basically set in stone forever. At the end of the day, this really isn't a story about a teleporting ship. It's a story about stories. It shows you how a tiny seed of truth, a real degaussing experiment, can get twisted and grown by our own imagination and fears into something absolutely fantastic. It's a great reminder to be open-minded, for sure, but also to be skeptical and to always ask, who's telling me this story and why? And that leaves us with one last kind of provocative question. As a story, the Philadelphia experiment is, let's be honest, way better than the truth. It's more exciting, it's more mysterious, and it really taps into our biggest questions about science and power. It makes you wonder about the tales we choose to believe and why sometimes, maybe, we prefer the amazing fiction over the simple fact.